Gonna get started. And I want to thank everybody for being here this morning. Folks coming in. All right, we'll call this meeting to order. Madam Secretary, will you call the roll, please?
Senator Smith, Senator Wheeler, Senator Yates,
Present.
Representative Gooch,
Here.
Representative King,
Present.
Representative Lehman, Representative McPherson, Representative Wesley, Representative Witten,
Here.
Senator Mays Bledsoe, Senator McDaniel,
Here.
Representative Bowling, Representative Bray, Representative Petrie, Senator Nunn,
Here.
Chair Fugit.
Here. All right, thank you. We don't have any minutes to approve, so we'll move right on into the agenda for today. And I'd like to ask Secretary Noel and all that are with him if you'll come to the table, please. It's always good to see you all in committee, and thank you for coming today and being part of the committee meeting. And I look forward to a good update on what's going on in Kentucky.
Mr. Chairman, it's always a pleasure to come before this committee. It's always an honor to answer questions and try to give information that we know is critical to making the right decisions that you all are obligated to do. And so my job and my colleagues is to make sure you have all the right information. So joining me today is Matt Wingate, our General Counsel at the Cabinet for Economic Development, and Terry Bradshaw, who is the President and CEO of the Kentucky Association of Economic Developers, a tremendous partner, an organization that really is the organization for economic development professionals across the state. So Terry, I don't know if you have anything you'd like to share with this group?
No, thank you so much for having us.
All right, thank you all very much for being here, and go ahead and start with your presentation.
I got to first figure out how to drive this puppy.
I can't help you there, sir.
All right. It's horrible to have a general counsel explain technology to me. So beyond that, it's a good thing. What we'd like to do today is answer your questions on the closing fund and on the Kentucky Product Development Initiative. And we've got several slides to give you that information. We also have quite a few slides we're not going to spend a lot of time on, but I know that you all like to have the data, like to have the information, everything goes along with it. So that's why we took the time to prepare the materials that we did today. I'm not going to go through my usual purpose, but I also believe it's important to start out. Why are we together working as the legislative branch, the executive branch, and in our agencies do what we do? It's really about making sure we're improving life for Kentuckians, all Kentuckians and not just a few. And I really do firmly believe great jobs are the best vehicle for people to really engage in their home and to have the confidence and the ability to look to the future and have the things that it takes to raise their family properly. You will also know we try to measure our activities. We try to make sure on one page you can summarize the work of our cabinet. And obviously we track outstanding results that would not have been accomplished without the legislative bodies, the local elected officials, the economic development professionals, the governor. It is truly a collaborative process, and by a lot of metrics, we are winning as a state, and I think it's important to keep that at the front table. This slide I just wanted to spend 1 second on. Today, as we talk about product and as we talk about the tools you need to be successful, we look at our 5 priority sectors that guide us in terms of bringing jobs and commerce into the state of Kentucky. But the biggest enablers are you have to have the best products and services to win because it's a competitive environment. We also have, as an economic development set of professionals, an obligation to do better in the workforce programs areas, to really understand that infrastructure improvements bring about opportunity in all communities, and placemaking, a really truly synchronized way in which businesses and communities work together to improve the quality of life. All those are the elements that it takes for existing companies to make the decision to expand or new ones to choose to make the decision to locate in our great state. So that's really the slide I just showed you. That is the document that guides the work of our cabinet every day. What are the 5 big areas that we need to be focusing on in terms of bringing results? And what are those 5 enablers that allow us to achieve those results? And you all have enabled us to be able to do that, and we very much appreciate that. You asked us today to give you an update on the Kentucky Product Development Initiative, talk a little bit about funding, what's needed going forward, and some suggested changes to the KPDI program. We'll answer those questions with the caveat, I don't get into the supply side of funding. I only get into the demand side. So I'll talk about the demand for our programs and the services, what's the payback, but my job's not to get into articulating what your all's job would be. I can articulate what we're doing with those funds and how we believe they're being used going forward. But I think you'll see enough information here to help you all answer those questions. And I know that Terry will have great opinions and great insight from her professional activities as well. Wanted to kind of make sure you see the slide. We don't need to go through it all. But we have established the right kind of criteria for a shovel-ready site. This goes actually even beyond the definitions we have used historically. Our job, I believe, is on all sites is to have the knowledge and information you need to know the difference between a piece of dirt and an actual asset. And so these kinds of criteria are critical as we look at developing products across the state and as we look at deploying taxpayer monies in terms of where those funds will go. And we'll talk in a minute about how we do that. One of the really key things that at least for me, is understanding definitions and understanding the differences between calling a piece of ground an industrial park or an industrial piece of property to truly having an industrial park. If you go on the various websites this week, you'll see that there's some land advertised for as little as $15,000 an acre, and it's called industrial land. Yet there's also land that's advertised for $300,000, $400,000 an acre, and typically those are in industrial parks that would be truly more shovel-ready in terms of attracting companies and industries. And understanding the nuances to that, I think, is critically important. One of the things that we've tried to do is just define the differences between them. And I'm pretty simple. I also will give you that if it's just industrial land, it likely doesn't have the infrastructure, likely doesn't have the amenities that it takes that companies are looking for. And the difference between acquiring a piece of ground and getting it further along that continuum of truly having an industrial park, it is an expensive proposition. I mean, if you're going to lay down 24-foot wide asphalt road, that's costing today on average $111.25 in the state of Kentucky per linear foot. Access roads typically on a 100-acre site are not short. And in many cases, you've got to lay down a concrete bed road for the kinds of heavy industries that are looking at those sites. Well, that jumps up to about $400 per linear foot. If you're going to put in water, much less running the source of it, if you're going to run power from some sort of point close to the site onto the site, just the piping alone can be $137 to $170 per linear foot for the water lines to be able to bring in the infrastructure to a site. The biggest unknown and where there's really high levels of costs, and it's the area that Matt knows that I harp on all the time with my team, we've got to invest a little bit to do some geotechs, maybe do some core drillings, because if you've got to do rock drilling or remove and excavate rock or blast out rock in terms of getting the site ready, you've got extremely high costs to do that. And just hauling off the rock that you're excavating off will typically run about $15 per cubic yard. I'm only sharing these kinds of costs, and I've got a lot more, and I'm sure you don't want me to go through them all. But what is really typically misunderstood is all the elements that's required to make that park work. As an example, every time there is a bend in your water or sewer lines and you go a different direction, now you've got to have couplings, and you've got to have all kinds of elements that get into that, like valves at every one of those. In some cases, every time there's a bend, there can be 5 valves, and those valves can run anywhere from $4,000 to $20,000 each. So all I'm trying to articulate here is that the complexity of really developing a park is really huge. Understanding the costs is really very important, and at the urging of this committee, we made sure we found funds outside of the KPDI program to offer additional funding up front for communities looking to come in for a KPDI application so that we could help them make sure they were comfortable enough with what some of those costs might be. So we were providing funding to do preliminary engineering and analysis work, even going so far as looking at drilling to know what those costs would be. And last but not least, which is oftentimes overlooked, is we provide the funding, and now we're doing it inside the KPDI program. Let's also, before we start spending money, not only know what it's going to cost, but are there streams that have to be mitigated? Are there wetland areas that would have to be mitigated? Because that drives the cost up significantly, and you always want to have a formula to know what is the invested cost per acre or usable land if you're going to go forward with the KPD application. That's the rigor. And I apologize for getting off on my topics, but I feel like that's an important one to make so you understand the significance of it. And I bring that up because with a cap of $2 million per county that the legislature put on, you did that, and I agree with it, to make more counties available and eligible to achieve the opportunity to invest in these kinds of products. But the reality is $2 million, when you're thinking about those costs, just doesn't go very far. Now, our approach is an amazing approach, and we actually have states who contact Terry and others to talk through the way that we do it. But we actually look at every project on exactly what is it that we're going to get out as a result of it. What's the return on investment? What's the relative impact? Because, you can invest more in a community that needs the jobs, and that actually gives you a higher impact, so therefore they should be scoring better than perhaps an investment in an area where there's a lot of job opportunities and the cost might be lower, because typically costs are higher in rural and eastern Kentucky to develop these parks. We also will tell you it's a process. And the good judge from Johnson County at a meeting that we held said something that really stood out. He said, we got turned down a couple of times on the KPDI program, but then I got the independent consultant that we use to come in and actually spend several hours with us and do consulting work with us that would have cost me $70,000 or more. And I learned, and of course, now they have been awarded funding. So the process of learning along the way, using the third-party consultant, and making sure that we are evaluating and providing those results, even to those that don't get funded, we think is one of the real benefits of the program. Now, you all have provided some legislative changes from the 2022 bill to the 2024 bill. We appreciate all of those. Perhaps most important was the fact the formula for the local match was changed more on a scale so that those communities that have higher unemployment and don't have the kind of growth didn't have the same kind of local match requirement for those communities that could afford it. We also, I think, put in place a process where we identified in 2024 that we placed even more emphasis on projects that will have that impact, with a slightly skewed scoring towards which ones will finish up the park before we go invest in a whole new park that's starting from scratch. Even though we want those communities to be eligible for that type of activity, it was a matter of more of just trying to establish the right criteria with a third-party consultant. And I'll just go back to in the lower right quadrant there, it's still a process. And we still have conversations with folks that have been awarded and helping them learn along the way and sharing information that we've learned, including cost estimates and things of that nature, to assist the communities have even more information as they go down the journey they're on to fully develop their park, their products, to be able to be competitive going forward. And I did push the right button on this one, and it just finally took for me. I won't spend a lot of time on this one, but we are in the middle of a process where we're inviting new rounds, new applications, as we're taking the applications in the previous round that went through that third-party evaluation, went through, Terry, lots of discussions, lively discussions amongst the team about each one of these projects. How do we even make some adjustments to make sure that we get more impact across the state? And now we're in the process of the due diligence, working with them to get the contract signed and to help them actually get started, as now we are actively engaging for that next round of opportunities across the state. So we double up on these, and I think do a really nice job of staffing and supporting the things that need to be done. This is our current process. We are out for bids for communities to come in and rebid, and we're also out doing the projects and governing them and putting them in place. We sign contracts, by the way, for each and every one of these projects, and Matt and his team take care of that, and we send people out to actually do the due diligence, do the follow-up, and to make sure the funding is being spent and used in the right way that it needs to be. Bottom line, you want metrics. I think this slide is a very important one, and I think it's quite impactful. We have 116 total projects across the entire state. Has every county been awarded a KPDI? No. But we've had a large number that have and a large number of impactful projects throughout the entire process. We have also identified the communities that have not been awarded KPDI, and here's what we have done. We have met with all of the area development districts. We have met with the Kentucky Association of Economic Developers. Our team called the local economic developer, if there was one, the judge or the mayor, if there was not, and said, we noticed that you have not been awarded a KPDI. How can we help? Is there information we can provide, questions that we can answer? So we're actively now, in addition to taking care of the projects that are in the pipeline, asking for new rounds, actively engaging with communities that have not submitted an application or been awarded one to see if there's some things that we can do to help them, or in some cases, and I won't name communities, we've talked to them about, okay, let's help you understand what you're getting into. Let's evaluate, do you have other options? And we've even helped communities understand maybe another option that might have a little bit higher land cost on the front end will actually serve them to have a lower cost on the back end. So we're just simply trying to get the learning and to help communities understand the things they need to do on a go-forward basis. If you look right here at the projects and the rounds, that gives you kind of the total investment in the parks and the approved amounts. I want to get to this next slide because I think that's the more powerful one. If you look at all the products that have come from the KPDI program, you might notice on the far left-hand column, we've got 20 active projects that have resulted from the pilot projects in the KPDI program. Why is that? Go back to my other slide. These things take time to develop. And the pilot projects were done several years ago, and many of them were in industrialized areas that just needed more money to kind of get further towards finished. So that's one that I think you can see that we have a lot of jobs, a lot of investment, primarily because those parks were further along. And as you go down each subsequent round that takes place, you realize that as we're in 2024, you're not going to see a lot of project announcements yet because it just takes time. But I'll come back and say 6,381 jobs with 35 announcements, bringing a $4.4 billion investment in these early stages of seeing the maturation of the KPDI program is an excellent result with great, I think, returns on investment. You ask me, well, what are some of those projects? The Crown Holdings project in Warren County, the Flash Metals project, which was really a fun project to work on in Bell County, Phoenix Paper down in Wickliffe, the Pratt Paper project in Henderson, the AESC and the Sound Elements projects that we were in here talking about with various members not too long ago. The Kitchen Foods project, which is building the facility and soon we'll be hiring a large number of people there in Hopkinsville. Both Latte and Kruger in Elizabethtown, Biomass in Muhlenberg County, Anna's Mundsman, which came in early down in Graves County after the tornadoes came through. What a great project and a great company. Go on and on, but these are some examples of those projects that I just mentioned to you, those 35 projects that have actually resulted in the kinds of jobs, announcement, and investments that we're talking about. And I'll speed it up so that we can get to questions. You know, it's always nice to know what your competition is doing. Maybe I'm wired differently, but the more I know about what others have, usually the hungrier I get, and I figure out how to be, which I'm not very good at all at being persuasive, but I certainly get enthusiastic about it, and I know how we pull in great teams like Terry and others. Many states are simply putting in a lot of money in this area. State of Ohio, $750 million. Illinois, $500 million. You've got states like Virginia that's up at $372 million to go in and invest in sites, $400 million in Pennsylvania. That's okay. I wouldn't even begin to ask for that level of funding from this esteemed body. I'm just simply pointing out we need to know what others are doing, and we just need to make sure we're better at what we do than they are. And quite candidly, we're a lot leaner and smaller than our competing states. I think that is a competitive advantage for us. I really do. And so we are up to the challenge. And Terry, I might ask you to comment on your members with some of the comments they've shared about the KPDI program.
So we did share with you some.
Make sure your microphone's on,
Oh,
please.
thank you so much. I thought the green light was on. That just tells you how early in the day it is.
Thank
My
you.
brain's not working. So we did share some comments from some of the communities who have landed projects and jobs. And I think those comments speak for themselves. These these funds changed the game and changed lives in those communities, created jobs where jobs previously did not exist, and changed families' lives. But I also want you to make note, and I wish we had used some of these. I didn't share them with Jeff and Matt. That's why they're not used, and I didn't think about it until Jeff was talking earlier. But even the communities who have received funding who have not landed a project yet have sent us comments when we requested about how this funding has changed their communities. Some have built spec buildings that they could not have built otherwise. Some have finished access to industrial property. So even though that chart that we used earlier shows you a lot of results with CapEx and jobs, even the communities that have not yet landed a project are greatly positively benefiting from these funds.
And Terry, there's the green light. There's also been some real knowledge that we've gained in doing what we call our turf meetings across the state. We go out and make sure that 3 times a year we go to our 5 regions, rotate them around. We've had several communities that have not applied for a KPDI, and they've indicated they're quite content to allow the adjacent community to get the industrial jobs or the big park going, and they're going to focus more on the residential piece or the support elements that go with it. And I think that's actually a very good strategy, something that we have talked about a lot, and that is we also still want to make sure that in each one of the 5 regions we have across the state, we can identify at least 2 what we would call sites that are almost ready or as close to being ready and that have a mega impact in that region. Because when you have those, that actually creates a magnet opportunity because people will come look at those sites and they might want to look at some other sites in the adjacent area, and you never know what decision they make. But having those really good sites by each one of those regions is one of our objectives, and we've gone a long, long way thanks to your all's help over the last couple of years in getting there. These comments by the local folks, again, they're happy. In fact, they offered to come in and testify. But we knew that if we gave them the microphone, we might be here a long time. And I know you all think when Noah gets the microphone, it's too long as it is. So we'll try to make sure we keep moving forward and moving things along. It's not just our comments. I just like the McKinsey and Company quote that they use, which is, in today's world, you really got to have the whole package. You got to have the workforce, you got to have the training and infrastructure, you got to have everything that's necessary for someone to make the investment. But in the end, it's all about speed to market, being able to take out uncertainty, being able to take out any of the unknown. Businesses hate things they don't know. And that's one of the benefits of the KPDI program is not only are we trying to get everything invested and ready to go to make it truly speed to market accessible, we make sure the knowledge and data about what still needs to be done or what's required, what do you have to do to get that done and what that cost is. That means you're taking an unknown and making it more certain for a company. And so that's one of the primary objectives that we have. And maybe I'll go back to winners versus losers. I see this in everything we do as basically the possible. And I really do believe everything we do here in Kentucky is about creating ideas and turning them into realities. And we can do it. And, gone is the day where, in some cases, Kentucky just didn't have a lot of product and we weren't really in the running. Now we have product. And I think that's shining a true spotlight on all the wonderful attributes we have in this state. And that really comes down to the best asset we have, which is great people and great communities. And we get wonderful feedback from consultants and companies when they finally come in and see these communities and get to know the communities. They say, wow, this is not the thing we see in every other state. But you got to have that product to bring them in to then actually take a look at and make that decision about where they want to locate. I mentioned to you our turf meetings. I think this data point's probably important. In our last round of meetings using anonymous technology, we just asked a couple of questions. And one of the questions was, do you as an economic development professional have the tools you need to be successful? And 95% of them said they do not. And the majority of them said KPDI program is one of those tools that really is essential for us to be able to be competitive. And I think that is the kind of information that we need, because those turf meetings and working with those professionals helps us better understand the nuances and differences in all 120 counties And I think in some respects you're going to see in a moment, we need to make sure we're creating some variations and some adjustments to balance out the level playing field for rural and eastern Kentucky while also continuing to help growth and other things occur throughout more of the urban areas. You asked the questions, is the same level of funding needed? I made the comment, I'm not in that supply side of things, but the demand side speaks for itself. Our last round of KPDI, we had $81 million, Terry, I think our third-party consultant, SSG, which their primary business is consulting with corporations where to go invest and locate. So they do this work for us, and they bring their knowledge. And their comments were, each of every one of those applications that were in our last round were better than any of the applications they had seen before. In fact, every round they saw better and better and better applications. Unfortunately, we had $81 million of requests and only $35 million of available funding. I mentioned to you what other states are doing. I also just can simply come back to this. In our values, I believe our values as a cabinet is to be a winner. Our job is to think like a winner, but we need to have a spirit of winning with integrity. And I really truly believe Kentucky is winning as a result of this program, and now perhaps is not the time to back away, but to realize we've got more work to do, especially helping rural and eastern Kentucky communities get the products they need to be competitive. You asked the question, I'm going to wait for Secretary. Did you want to make a comment about is funding needed? Because that's not an area that I need to delve into.
Yeah, I'll just follow up with what Jeff said. We recognize at KAED that you have a responsibility to budget for a multitude of programs, and we respect that. But we would also be remiss, I felt like, if I came here today and said we have $81 million worth of requests and we only have $35 million to fund those requests, and all the states around us that we compete with have sometimes hundreds of millions of dollars more. It would be irresponsible of me to not say to you, please consider those things as you look at funding. The states wouldn't invest hundreds of millions of more dollars if they didn't know that would provide success for their states. So I just ask you to look at the data and use that as you determine what we have available, because our local communities, whether they're asking for $50,000 or $2 million, these things are game changers for those folks.
Thank you, Terry. And shared responsibility always leads to shared opportunities, and I think that's what this program is all about. You asked what kind of changes, and we could be here all day because there's a lot of changes, but a couple of the big ones perhaps would be, is there room to consider adjusting the criteria such that defining the rural and eastern Kentucky communities in Kentucky, perhaps there's a little bit more funding per county that they could be eligible for, insofar as the same metrics with a third party have to be met. Return on impact, importance to that community, the thoughtfulness in terms of how those funds are being used. But providing just a little extra funding is not because we're trying to give more money, but you try to start cutting and filling into a site in eastern Kentucky, it just costs more. You start trying to build a spec building in rural Kentucky, you build a spec building, and in an urban area, your appraised value is likely going to be higher than the market value just because there's more activity in an urban area. You don't have that same opportunity in a rural area. We're just trying to point out that there's some differences here, and perhaps there's an opportunity of making some modest adjustments to reflect the opportunities that are needed in rural and eastern Kentucky. Another would be, do we reserve or do you guide us to reserve funding that might be used in a way, well, let's finish up some of these projects so that we can really articulate a couple of these projects in each of the 5 regions across Kentucky that are truly shovel-ready and ready to go. And in our turf meetings, we got a lot of support from economic developers that are even starting their application process, acknowledging if we've got somebody that's 30 miles down the road that's got a finished park, that's going to help us get the suppliers if they get a large user in there. So there's a lot of great thought giving into this, but those are just 2 quick answers to the questions that we had. And perhaps the best way of going back to answering the question, do we need to continue the program? Results speak for themselves, and there's a lot of third-party agencies that are recognizing Kentucky for the things that we have achieved, And the Site Selection magazine has had us ranked up there over the last 5 years as one of the top states per capita in terms of the kinds of projects we've announced. It feels good to have new site consultants who said, I've never been to Kentucky, but I heard all the stuff you're doing. We got a prospect we'd like to give you a chance to respond on an RFI. That's what we're seeing. That's what we are achieving going forward. Go through the closing fund. Won't take me quite as long, but you asked some general questions about the overview and how we have used them and funds that are remaining. I'll give you the exact language from the appropriations that you all provided, and that included the funding, but it also required that this project be a mega-type project with at least $10 million, providing some exception to the cabinet to evaluate the impact, where the county is, and that sort of thing. I'm very proud to say that since we have been involved in this, there's $4.14 billion of projects that have been announced, 4,700 jobs. We've seen an investment of about 23.8 million of the fund used. A B is not supposed to be in this slide. It is the M word for 23.4 million from the closing fund that have been used for 16 projects in 14 different counties. 14 different projects, and some counties have more than one project. Let me go to, I think, what's really important here. And by the way, where have we used the closing fund on these approved and committed projects? So there's 16, 23.8 million that we have used with, you see, the jobs and investment. We've also got some projects that we think are very likely to close, and we've got 5 of those, and we've set aside $6 million on those projects. We've made offers to prospects, and I don't want to handicap them. I'm very prone to be superstitious. Sometimes I even have team members say, well, we're in a really good spot, and I take the opposite. We just got to do more to keep selling to them, so I don't score things exactly the same as everybody else. So we've got offers that are out there of 12 that would use about $44 million, but if we get them, $6.8 billion of investment, 4,700 jobs. Most important, we had 10 projects over the last 2 years that we made offers to that the project's either on hold, they have not gone forward, or perhaps they've even chosen another community. And we offered a large sum of money because you can see they were going to bring $14 billion of investment and 5,000 jobs. A lot of these projects we get, believe it or not, move very, very rapidly. It is not unusual for a project to put a 60, 90-day window out here for them to cut communities, to cut states, and to narrow it down to 1 or 2. And so we need, and that's why we appreciate the closing fund, we need the capacity to be able to say, okay, we understand that in this particular site, the cut and fill requirements to put in the pad for your building is going to be $2.5 million more than what you're looking at over in Ohio and Indiana. We get that in some states they're offering more cash, but what we offer is to put cash in where it matters the most. We know that in order for you to operate, you got to have a rail line and a access to rail on your site. That can run a couple of $1 million. Those are the things that it's almost in some states that I've worked in both on the corporate side and having done this, there's a lot of states, that's just what I call anti-stakes. You show up and you say, well, I'm going to need a rail spur, and I'm going to need an access road, and I'm going to need you to put in the pilings for me. You got it. Don't worry about that. Now let's talk about the extra added things we can provide. That's the competitive nature. That's where having the funding allows us to be competitive and in the running for several of these projects. You also provided supplemental funding to do infrastructure, especially around utilities.
Please continue. Well, after we all get our phones off.
I got delayed.
Sorry about that. So that's what we have the funds for. And on the area of infrastructure, there are times where utility won't put the investment in that's necessary to get the project to fruition. We're working right now on a couple of projects that involve running gas lines that are actually transmission lines owned by the local community. They don't have the capacity to meet the needs of the companies. We're trying to help out with this fund that we were provided by you all to make sure we don't lose those projects. And so we've got basically funding that's been proposed for these projects. And by the way, I'll just disclose, because I think I can. It's well known that AESC and Ascend Elements is now already put back out this process to start rebuilding their facility. We're working with AESC. Both of those have some pretty major electrical issues that need to be invested in, which is where a portion of these funds are outstanding going forward on the project. Now, I want to also give you, a better sense of what are some kinds of projects that we've worked on. I'm going to use one because it broke the mold of economic development, and it was an existing business. It's in Mason County, with Mitsubishi. We provided some closing funds on the front end to a company that was basically getting out of the automotive sector because of the transition into EV into their product, and so they didn't have enough volume. They're now getting into the production and manufacturing of heat pumps. Typically, companies, when they close down a line, they close down the facility and they go somewhere else. We were able to convince them to transition out that closing and transition in the new product. And providing them some of the funding for training, retraining, and some of the work on the building is how we were able to manage to win that project. You had Hitachi in Madison County. Obviously, you had Pratt again down in Henderson, an unbelievable project that was very fast-paced. You had Latte, and I keep coming back to Latte because they provide a technology that is so rare that they happen to be one of the few companies around the world that really can provide the type of very, very thin foiling that's necessary for the EV industry. We had Canadian Solar, which is going in Shelby County and creating over 1,500 jobs. Just recently, we announced General Electric adding 800 jobs to Appliance Park. And oh, by the way, they were looking at 2 other states and already had offers on buildings as we got involved. And I think having that locate here only strengthens the existing jobs we have at Appliance Park. So that's an example of how we use those funds. The biomass energy engineering project that's down in Muhlenberg County got a little bit of closing funds because of the unique nature, and that was the first tenant in that park, but it's in a great area of the state. Using funds for things like pilings, rail spurs, using funds for things like cut and fill requirements if that is an area that needs to be taken care of. If there's a situation for training that's unique, that's where we use these closing funds and we provide a contract, and they then have to stipulate and give the MAT their progressions before they get the funding. So we make sure the investments they need to make are being made before we disperse and put those funds out. In terms of the offers, I wanted to make sure you saw where we have made these offers by region. These are the 5 regions that we've created in partnership with our local economic development professionals. It's just easier to break down and show you where these sites are in terms of using it on a regional basis. Plus, I like to use this slide because I think it's really important before we talk about which county got what. Let's first see what we've done in each of the regions, and you can see we've had a nice spread of offers made by each of the regions from the closing fund. Other states, back to Illinois, they've got a $400 million, what they call funding for high priority projects. Indiana's created a $500 million closing fund. South Carolina, even Tennessee, with no personal income tax, has cash grant funding to offer to projects. And the funding family wrote an article about a year ago that really talked about that in today's world, cash grants is the name of the game to help an existing company expand or attracting a new company that would locate. Go back to the same comment, though. We are winning, thankfully, because of all the tools you all have provided and the tenacity and professionalism of our local communities and the economic development professionals and the mayors and the judges, the work of our governor. It takes a real collaborative team effort to be successful in economic development, and the legislature is a key member of that collaborative team that allows us to win in these projects. So I said a lot, talked a lot. We have used up $23 million of the closing fund. If we get some of these projects I announced, it's going to use up more. So you're going to say, well, that means you've got funding, and we do. But we have offers outstanding for some fairly large projects that would use a large amount of that money. And if they go away for whatever reason, I usually go into depression for 24 hours, and then I come in and say, let's find out where they went, why they went, and let's make sure our funding is rolled over so we can use it for future projects. So I know I spoke a lot, went more into detail perhaps than you wanted, Mr. Chairman, but we provided a lot of information in the deck. You all have that, and obviously we're here and able and ready to answer any questions you have. Plus, As you read the deck and you see other things that might come to your mind, please let Matt, me, or Terry know, and we'll answer your questions directly for you or go through the chairman to make sure you get the information that you need.
Thank you, sir. We do have some questions. Representative Whitten.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Secretary. There's a lot of, over here.
Here you are.
A lot of great information. I did have a question. You spoke about the criteria that's looked at. Is housing part of that criteria? I'm really have been diving into the housing landscape in Kentucky, and obviously there's a direct correlation between housing and jobs. And I just want to make sure that we're that we're looking at both, because it almost causes a bigger problem when we create the jobs and don't have the places for Kentuckians to live.
Matt's trying to put his arm on me and hold me down and say, you don't have to get overly excited. I appreciate the question because the answer is absolutely yes. Housing is a huge part of the equation on any project and any company that's looking. Now, what we do is we actually go into the multiple listing services. We look at what the incomes are going to be. We try to identify how many homes are on the market, where the rental properties are, in addition to other things we do that I don't think other states do, and try to help mitigate that concern. But it is truly a genuine issue. And again, I'm not supposed to ask for funding, and I'm not. But some of you know I'm prone to throw out ideas. I mean, we even kicked around, should we be able to use a portion of the closing funds and even KPDI to do projects? But the criteria that we would have is if it's a project with a private company and the community. You know, in my previous life, the company I was with, we built an 85-unit multifamily housing. We also were engaged in doing a subdivision, not because we wanted more housing. We just knew our people needed it. And we did it in a very creative way that didn't require a huge liability on the company side, but it was really a partnership with the local community, even the state, in terms of providing some of the funding for infrastructure and things that need to be done. I actually believe there's opportunities that just take away funding for a second. If we could find some dirt that maybe isn't being used for industrial, set it aside for residential. You go to the largest employers in that area and you create some sort of a formula where perhaps if we don't get a house sold to your employees and others, you maybe help do the carry on what the cost could be. Or if we could provide under the grant program funding for the infrastructure, then you can work with local builders and say, we'll put the dollar to you give you the land for $1, and when you sell the house, we get paid back, but these are going to be homes and residential units that are more for the worker housing. I think there's a lot of creative things, and companies know housing is a critical piece of the equation. Companies don't like to offer up things typically, but companies are willing to sit down in a meeting and say, if we're going to do this, are you willing to do that so that we can have a collaborative effort on housing? I think there's some opportunities in that space, Representative Whitten, and I went further than you wanted, but in answer to your question, housing is a critical piece because companies know that if they can't find a place for their folks to live, they may not stay with them a long time. And while they're comfortable with folks commuting to work and whatever is the norm, if they can't find housing within that normal commute pattern, you're going to likely lose an employee, or you're likely not going to be able to attract the employee that you need. So it is an important element. I'd love to see mixed development, and I've had some people say you can't do it. Well, we did it in where I was before. We had a Worthington Steel, we had a paper mill, we put in beautiful berming and landscaping, built some walking trails, and bingo. On the other side, we did a 48-unit housing development in a collaborative public-private partnership, sold the sucker out in about 18 months, and people still love living there. Some of those houses actually were tax credit houses, and nobody knew the difference because putting detail is important. And in today's world, walking distance to work is not a bad thing.
Thank you. Yeah, I believe the private-public partnership is a really great opportunity that we need to look more into.
Representative McPherson.
Yes, so.
There you are.
Yeah,
I know
yes.
that. I see you over there.
Yes, sir. So I just want to thank you so much for, I'm a real estate appraiser. I think you mentioned one of the projects of keeping the companies that we have and are successful interstate, make sure we're not looking so forward that we're not looking backward to say the ones that have been successful here that we still need as they grow. We need more infrastructure. We need things. I would say that I sure appreciate there's so many rural areas that just need somebody to kind of take them by the hand and say, these hard questions. We've done them before, and we'll answer them for you. I think I know it's kind of hard to do, but I wish we could get more counties to collaborate together and to find a local spot that's pretty close to all their counties and already has some infrastructure and go together and build a park that would work together, an industrial park. But a lot of people will say over the years, oh, we have an industrial park. It's been sitting out here for 25 years. You're correct. We only have a piece of land that doesn't have the infrastructure to it. And I would say the back about 10 minutes ago, you said that, if you could put more money into rural Kentucky in the infrastructure side, I would say that that infrastructure is more important there than it might be in the Bowling Green area or the area where you've already got the infrastructure. The one-time infrastructure there will repeat itself over and over and over. And if you're going to have housing, if you're going to have all these things, you first got to have the roads and the water. Water is gold these days. If you don't have water, you don't have anything. And if so, the infrastructure to me is probably the most important part of this. If we don't want a road or a bridge that goes nowhere, but if you really want to do something in Eastern Kentucky to help, you have to have the infrastructure there in place, and you have to have these true shovel-ready parks. And if you can extend a road another mile or two and gather up some land that could be used for housing, all those things, once you've got it in place, it's so much easier to add on to, but that first investment is the hardest. So I appreciate everything you've done and continue to do, and I support you any way I can.
Well, Representative Christian, we appreciate everybody in the legislature because you're the critical partners. I'm going to amplify something you just said for a second. And, first of all, working with the communities, Terry and her team put on great webinars, training sessions, engage with all of their professional members. It's a tremendous collaboration because knowledge is king. And I think also things that we're doing together, like putting together for the first time, what I call written guideline for existing business and retention programs so that everybody they can still do it their own way, but we need to create more of these kinds of standardization that create kind of the norm and even including what's the right kind of questions that you ask when you go talk to a company. And I'm taking the full blame on the second piece, and that is, we were very active in promoting, look, communities come together as multiple counties because then you can pool your resources and get funding. Several have done it beautifully. It's worked great. Others have done it, and there's been some pushback and some controversy. And I say I should take the blame on that because while I'm not going to go in and fight the local issues, that's not our job, I need to always be willing to, like I'm going to do now, and say we need to help encourage those kinds of regional parks. Because you get a regional park, they're going to have the types of employers, they're going to employ people within a 45-minute driving radius, which means putting heads in beds provides the kind of benefits when we can get the housing, by the way, but it allows for investment in those houses. And so in some cases, regional efforts are the right way to go. And I even see it where some communities benefit by having that big regional park nearby, and they might have a smaller park, but they're still going to get the activity in that smaller park and not have to put as much money in, but they can still benefit from this kind of thinking. And so remiss on me for not actually having brought that up in this presentation. I had that as a note, and you can tell old age is getting to me. I forgot.
I would also say to that, to both your question and Representative Witten's questions about we call them the other things that we have to address in economic development. And we, as economic developers, recognize that we don't actually really do housing. We don't really know how to do housing, but we most certainly know that without it, we can't do our jobs well. Same thing with the workforce, same thing with childcare. So we recognize there are those other things that we have to look at and support. At KAED, we've made a really concerted effort to look to our partners, the Kentucky Realtors Association, the Kentucky Chamber, CAM, a variety of other folks who have the expertise in those areas that can help us understand how we can get to where we need to be. And you'll see us at KAED working with those partners throughout this next year as we try to address some of those things.
Senator Bledsoe.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Secretary, for your presentation. It's always, I think you do a phenomenal job. In the KDPI program, I hear phenomenal things about from every one of my counties and regionally in the Bluegrass area. And there's 12 in that space, and a lot of them are in Central Kentucky.
They are.
And I appreciate that. They're grateful. And Terry, you do a phenomenal job advocating for your members. Just in case you don't know, everyone talks about how glowingly you perform and are a strong advocate. So I was going to ask two questions, but you already answered the one of them, which is if we move that number of 2 million up, you suggested 2.4 to 2 as being helpful. So I appreciate that, because I was going to ask that exact question. Infrastructure is more expensive now than it's ever been, and building is not cheap when you're trying to build a road or go into some rock or even a cave like it is in more of the Central Kentucky area. But two, to the affordable housing conversation, Indiana has a pretty good model of a revolving infrastructure fund that does more of the housing side. I think that would be something we should take a look at before next year's budget. But my question is on the benchmarking against other states. You mentioned several of them, Indiana, Illinois, Ohio, Virginia, that have significantly more money invested, but they also have significantly more population and budget. So I'd be curious, what's the ratio of general fund percent? Not that you'd have it off the top of your head, but if we could get just an idea of more of the percent of the budget and population, might be helpful to see kind of on the benchmark where we sit, more than just a fund number.
That is an absolute great suggestion, and we'll do that. I also will try to get some additional information as well in terms of what does it cost to develop. There is a disproportionate cost sometimes for Kentucky.
Yep.
Not as a negative, it just is. Compared to perhaps an area like Indiana that doesn't have as much bedrock and some of the kind of things to deal with. So we'll get that's a great suggestion, and we'll get that kind of calculation done. Christopher Snyder will be asked to do that as soon as I get back to the office.
Thank you. I think that'd be helpful going into next year, just about how much money is appropriate to be competitive.
And I do want to connect two dots to the two questions that Representative Whitten mentioned here. And again, I'm not here asking for anything other than I do want to thank you for the grant program, because one of the things that we've been trying to do is help local economic developers. As Terry said, you don't have to be the expert, but bring the experts to the table, and let's start going after grant funding at the federal level. Despite what may happen with the federal cuts, and there will be, there's still going to be significant grant programs. And seeing how local communities can understand how to go after those grants and try to make it a part of a strategy. In other words, to your point, Representative McPherson, we should really truly be trying to see whatever federal funds we can get first before we tap into the KPDI program, or in some respects, come to KPDI or the close or whatever funding you give us. To your point, well, we got funding to do this kind of water and sewer, and we've got this land, and I love the comment. Let's go a half mile down the road and let's get some other land available for residential. That doesn't have to be the economic developers, but could be done in private, because economic developers are all about enabling and collaborating. I also still believe that combining those and making that as part of an understanding, plus helping communities understand, and you all understand, having a closing fund means also that if we get a piece of ground that's further along, company wants to come in, and they may say, I need to have a new residential development and I need to finish this up in the park. Then you have closing funds to make that happen. And that's the strategy part, and that's the reason I showed you our blueprint and our enablers, because we try to evaluate everything we do, and I could go through all the projects we had in terms of what you got from the investment beyond just that jobs. I really truly believe the more you can invest in the infrastructure and the whole of what it takes to make communities competitive, we need that flexibility to be able to do those kind of combined activities. Plus, let's make sure we're encouraging folks to take advantage of the tools that we've been offered from you all in a strategic way. Sometimes it's easy for communities to say, well, I'm going to go after the grant to do this over here, and then I'm going to go to the KPI to do the industrial park over here. Let's see if we can combine some of those together. And I'm sorry for getting off the topic.
Representative King.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you all for being here today. My brain loves a map. If we could go back to the map regarding the funding for the ones you were looking at, it's probably halfway through your deck. I don't know if it's because I'm sitting close to my dear friend or because well, you just passed it. It was the funding for each of that one right there. Thank you. I don't know if it's because I'm sitting next to her or she's a dear friend, but I have a similar question about this same topic. So I was trying to look and try to consider what's the common denominator about the three states that have the most to invest, the 500 million, 750, and 400. Do we know what they have in common where they have that revenue able to be invested in this type of project? Is there something in common that they have it available?
For the most part, it would be just they're getting the funding from general funds. But as you know, Jobs Ohio is a big investor in this particular fund. Some of it came from the general fund, but others of it came from Jobs Ohio. Jobs Ohio is set up differently. They have an alcohol control situation so that they get funding from liquor sales through liquor sales in the state of Ohio that funds their economic development, which is why it's against our policy as an economic developer, I hope anyway, that when you're having, a visit to Sandusky Park or something with your family, you are not allowed to have an alcoholic beverage in Ohio because you're just funding the economic development efforts in Ohio. So I don't believe in that. But that's kind of where I know Ohio gets a lot of their funding to do these programs. And there's some other programs in Virginia that I know of, and I believe North Carolina, where they've got a dedicated fund that helps them fund some of these programs. And we'll get that information for you.
I don't have census data right in front of me, but it seems like some of the ones that are investing similar to us, their population is probably more similar to ours, but I am just curious of how those three main states have that revenue available, to invest in these kind of developments.
We will get those, and
Thank you.
Senator Bledsoe is actually spot on. We'll get on a per capita basis
Thank you.
as well.
Thank you, Chair.
All right, any other questions? Thank you, Secretary Noel, and all your guests for being here today and your presentation. We appreciate your work and look forward to seeing you more in East Kentucky. And I do appreciate the fact that in the last couple of years you all have been down there a lot more, and I appreciate that very much.
I know I'm running out of time, Mr. Chairman, but Perry County is my poster county because I think we're up to almost 30 grant awards in that area, and they did not have the funding to do the local match before, and because of your all's direction, that's an example of a community that just has simply said, we got a window that's open, we're going to go after it, and they have done some amazing, amazing projects. And there's other counties. I don't want to exclude other counties, but I think it's always great to remind ourselves that when Perry County and the folks in Hazard can actually achieve those kind of results and be the top awardee under the grant program, it's worth recognizing.
They do good work. All right, our next meeting is August the 20th, and we